The warship Ironclad Valor hovered in orbit above Tarkos IV, a jungle-covered planet filled with storms and untamed wilderness. Captain Darius Voss stood at the viewing deck, his sharp gray eyes fixed on the planet below. He had seen many battlefields, but this was something else. Behind him, Admiral Lineacor studied a holographic display, her expression hard as steel. "The Hezarith want a treaty," she said, "but they demand a warrior to take part in their bonding ritual. No one knows what it does. No one has volunteered." Voss smirked. "So they want a soldier crazy enough to risk it?" "Yes," Kor replied. "And you're the only one who didn't say no." Voss turned away from the window, brushing a hand through his short, dark brown hair. He was tall and built for battle, his body hardened by years of training in war. His uniform was crisp, but the scars on his arms told stories of fights long past. He wasn't afraid of the unknown. In fact, the unknown excited him. Across the room, a transmission buzzed to life. A deep, rumbling voice filled the air. "Send your champion. Let us see if humanity is worthy of the Hezarith." The voice belonged to Varish Tor, the Hezarith war chief. His holographic image flickered into view, a towering reptilian warrior covered in dark blue and black scales. His eyes, golden and fierce, held the wisdom of countless battles. He wore heavy battle armor, each plate etched with ancient symbols of his people's history. Voss stepped forward, meeting Varish Tor's gaze through the hologram. "I'll do it." A moment of silence stretched between them. Then, Varish Tor gave a slow nod. "We shall see if you have the heart of a warrior, human." The dropship rumbled as it broke through the planet's atmosphere. Inside, Voss checked his gear, but he knew it wouldn't help him in this ritual. This wasn't a fight of weapons. It was something else entirely. When the ship landed, the doors hissed open to reveal the jungle world of Tarkos IV. The air was thick with moisture, and towering trees stretched toward the sky, their massive roots twisting like the arms of sleeping giants. Voss stepped onto the muddy ground, his boots sinking slightly. Ahead of him, a group of Hezarith warriors waited. Each one was massive, at least 8 feet tall, covered in armored scales. Their eyes burned like fire, and their bodies were built for war. But there was something more than strength in them. There was honor. Varish Tor stood at the front, his powerful form towering over Voss. The Hezarith war chief carried a massive ceremonial blade, its edge glowing faintly with alien energy. He studied Voss for a long moment, then spoke. "You have courage, human, but courage alone is not enough." Voss met his gaze without flinching. "Then let's find out if I have what it takes." The warriors led him deeper into the jungle, where an ancient stone structure rose from the earth. Strange symbols glowed along its surface, pulsing with a faint blue light. Voss could feel the power in the air, something old, something alive. Varish Tor turned to him. "The ritual will bond us, mind and body. If you are weak, it will break you." Voss rolled his shoulders. "Let's get on with it." The warriors surrounded them, chanting in their deep, rumbling voices. The ground trembled. The air thickened. The ritual had begun. And Voss had no idea what was about to happen. Voss stood in the center of the ancient stone circle, his heart pounding in his chest. The air around him was heavy, charged with energy. The Hezarith warriors had formed a wide ring, their deep voices chanting in a language older than human history. The sound rumbled like a distant storm, sending a shiver down his spine. Varish Tor stepped forward, towering over him. The Hezarith war chief's dark blue scales shimmered under the glow of the ritual symbols. His golden eyes locked onto Voss with an intensity that made even battle-hardened men uneasy. "This is your last chance to turn back, human," Varish Tor said, his deep voice carrying through the night air. "Once we begin, there is no escape." Voss smirked, rolling his shoulders. "I didn't come this far to run." Varish Tor gave a slow nod of approval. He turned and lifted his massive ceremonial blade, its sharp edge glowing faintly with a strange, pulsing light. With a swift motion, he slashed it across his own palm. Thick, dark blood dripped onto the stone floor. Voss took a deep breath and pulled his combat knife from his belt. Without hesitation, he dragged the blade across his palm, wincing as bright red blood welled up. The Hesarith warriors roared in approval, their fists striking their armored chests. The ritual had begun. The ground beneath Voss trembled. A sudden wave of heat rushed through his body, spreading from his wounded palm up his arm and into his chest. His vision blurred. Strange symbols, ones he had never seen before, began to glow across the ancient stone beneath him. Then, pain. It was like fire racing through his veins, burning him from the inside out. His knees buckled, and he clenched his teeth, refusing to cry out. His mind was flooded with visions, not his own memories, but Varish Tor's. He saw endless battlefields, towering alien cities reduced to ruins, the screams of the dying, the clash of metal and bone. Varish Tor's past rushed through him, years of war and loss, victories and sacrifices. Through the haze of pain, he heard Varish Tor's voice in his head. Do not fight it, human. Let the bond take hold. Voss gasped for air, his muscles trembling. He could feel Varish Tor's presence inside his mind, his thoughts, his instincts, his emotions, and in return, he knew the Hesarith could feel his. The pain reached its peak. Then, as suddenly as it came, it was gone. Voss collapsed to his hands and knees, sweat dripping from his face. He looked up, breathing hard, and met Varish Tor's eyes. Something had changed. The warriors around them had fallen silent. They stared at Voss in shock. Varish Tor studied him carefully, tilting his head. It is done, he said, his voice lower than before. Voss pushed himself to his feet, his body feeling different, lighter, stronger, sharper. His senses had heightened. He could hear the rustling of distant leaves, the slow breathing of each Hesarith warrior. He could even feel Varish Tor's presence, not just beside him, but within him. One of the older warriors stepped forward, his dark green scales catching the flickering ritual light. His name was Corvalin, a veteran of 100 battles. This is impossible, Corvalin growled. The bond should not have worked. No human should be able to withstand it. Voss raised an eyebrow. Well, guess I'm not just any human. Varish Tor let out a deep, rumbling chuckle. No, you are not. The other warriors muttered among themselves. Some looked at Voss with newfound respect, while others glared in suspicion. The ritual was meant to test him, but no one had expected him to survive it. Voss flexed his fingers, staring at his healed palm. The wound had vanished, leaving behind a faint glowing scar in the shape of a Hesarith battle symbol. He looked up at Varish Tor, his voice steady. So, what happens now? Varish Tor's golden eyes burned with something new, not just respect, but curiosity. Now, the war chief said, we see what you have become. Voss sat on a stone bench inside the Hesarith war camp, his mind still spinning. The jungle around him pulsed with alien life. Strange insects hummed in the thick air, and distant creatures let out deep, echoing calls. He could hear everything more clearly than before. He could even sense the warriors moving around the camp, as if he knew where they were without seeing them. He wasn't sure how, but he could feel Varish Tor's presence even when the war chief wasn't nearby. It was like a second heartbeat in the back of his mind. He had always trusted his instincts in battle, but now those instincts felt sharper, stronger. Varish Tor stood a few feet away, his massive form looming in the dim firelight. The war chief's golden eyes studied him with quiet curiosity. You are different now, human, Varish Tor rumbled. You feel it, do you not? Voss flexed his hands. His fingers felt more precise, his movements smoother. Even his breathing had adjusted, aligning with some deep warrior rhythm that he had never learned, yet somehow understood. Yeah, Voss muttered. I feel more. Varish Tor gave a slow nod. The bond has changed you. You are no longer only human. And yet, you are not Hesarith either. The other warriors watched from a distance, whispering among themselves. Some eyed Voss with curiosity, others with doubt. One warrior, Corvalin, stepped forward, his green scales catching the fire's glow. His thick arms were crossed over his chest, and his yellow eyes narrowed. "This is unnatural," Corvalin growled. "No human has ever bonded with a Hesarith. The fact that he survived is disturbing enough. But what if this has consequences?" Voss smirked. "Pretty sure everything has consequences." Corvalin's nostrils flared, but Varish-Tor raised a clawed hand. The bond was tested. It held. That is all that matters. But Corvalin wasn't convinced. He turned to the other warriors. "What if he is no longer one of them? What if he is no longer one of us?" The murmurs grew louder. Some warriors nodded in agreement. Others remained silent, waiting for their leader's response. Varish-Tor let out a deep breath and stepped forward. "There is only one way to know what he has become." The war chief turned to Voss, his golden eyes flashing. "You will fight." The training pit was a wide circle of hard-packed dirt, surrounded by large stone pillars. The jungle canopy hung high above, letting only slivers of moonlight touch the ground. Voss stood at the edge, rolling his shoulders. Across from him stood Ravak, one of the strongest warriors in the camp. He was a massive Hesarith with dark red scales and thick, muscular arms. His eyes gleamed with excitement. He had been waiting for a fight like this. Voss had fought plenty of aliens before. But now, something was different. His mind was calmer, his body lighter. He felt connected to something ancient, something primal. Varish-Tor raised a hand. "Begin." Ravak lunged first, moving faster than a creature his size should be able to. Voss saw it before it happened, not with his eyes, but with his instincts. His body reacted before his mind could think. He dodged, effortlessly. Ravak's claws sliced through the air where Voss had been a second earlier. The big warrior grunted in surprise. Voss grinned. "Gonna have to do better than that." Ravak snarled and attacked again, his powerful arms swinging in a brutal arc. Voss ducked, his movements smoother than they had ever been. His reactions weren't just human anymore. He could feel Varish-Tor's warrior instincts guiding him. With a sudden burst of speed, Voss moved inside Ravak's guard and delivered a sharp punch to the warrior's ribs. The impact sent a shockwave through the pit. Ravak staggered back, eyes wide. The watching warriors let out low murmurs. No human should have been able to do that. Voss stepped back, breathing steady. He looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers. He felt stronger, faster, more aware. Varish-Tor stepped forward. "Enough." Ravak held his side but nodded, his eyes filled with something new, not anger, but respect. Corvalin, watching from the edge, frowned. "This is not normal." Varish-Tor turned to him. "No, it is not." He looked back at Voss, his golden eyes unreadable. "This is something new." Voss sat near the fire later that night, staring into the flickering flames. He could feel Varish-Tor's emotions through their bond. A quiet curiosity, a sense of caution and excitement mixed together. He exhaled slowly. He had signed up for an alliance mission. Instead, he had become something no human had ever been before. And deep down, he knew one thing. There was no turning back. Voss sat near the edge of the Hesarith war camp, staring up at the night sky. Stars glittered like distant fireflies, and the jungle around him was alive with the sounds of unseen creatures. His body still buzzed with energy from the bond. Every breath felt deeper, every movement more precise. He had always been a skilled soldier, but now he felt like something more. Yet doubt crept into his mind. What was he now? Footsteps crunched behind him. He didn't need to turn. He already knew who it was. Varish-Tor. The Hesarith war chief stopped beside him, arms crossed over his broad chest. His golden eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. "You are troubled." Voss exhaled through his nose. Wouldn't you be? Verishtor studied him for a long moment. You are the first human to survive the bonding ritual. You move like us, fight like us, and yet you are not his Earth. He tilted his head slightly. Do you fear what you have become? Voss clenched his fists. I don't know if I've become anything yet, but I do know that your people are watching me like I'm some kind of experiment. He looked at Verishtor, his gaze steady. Even you. The war chief let out a deep, rumbling chuckle. You are not wrong. Silence stretched between them. The jungle hummed, the fire behind them crackling softly. Then Verishtor spoke again, his voice quieter this time. Long ago, before the wars, before the bloodshed, the Hezareth were not as they are now. We were divided, different clans, different ways of thinking. It was the bonding ritual that united us. Voss raised an eyebrow. And now I've just bonded with your kind. So what does that make me? Verishtor smiled faintly, baring sharp teeth. That is for you to decide, human. The next morning, the warriors gathered at the training grounds. The air was tense. Some still looked at Voss with suspicion, others with curiosity. Corvalin stood with his arms crossed, his dark green scales gleaming under the sunlight. The bond has changed him. That much is clear. His yellow eyes flicked to Verishtor. But the question remains, can we trust him? Voss smirked. You could try asking me instead of talking like I'm not here. A few warriors growled in annoyance, but Verishtor raised a hand. He has earned his place through the ritual. But trust is won through battle. Corvalin grunted. Then let's test him in real battle. Voss's smirk faded. What kind of battle? Verishtor's expression darkened. Our enemies, the Skari, have been raiding our supply routes. They grow bolder with each attack. If they are not stopped, war will follow. Voss knew of the Skari, a ruthless insectoid species that operated in swarms, attacking in overwhelming numbers. He had fought them before. They were fast, brutal, and nearly impossible to predict. I'll go, Voss said without hesitation. Verishtor nodded. Then prepare yourself, bonded warrior. Tonight, we hunt. Hours later, Voss crouched beside Verishtor at the edge of a dense ravine. The rest of the warriors, 10 of them, heavily armed, waited behind them. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth. Down below, in the darkness of the ravine, the Skari swarmed. Voss could hear them clicking and chittering, their sharp exoskeletons scraping against the stone as they moved in the shadows. They were fast and vicious, with razor-sharp limbs and glowing red eyes. Verishtor turned to him. You feel them, don't you? Voss swallowed. He did. He could sense movement before it happened, as if his mind had tuned into some invisible frequency. His connection to Verishtor was growing stronger. He tightened his grip on his weapon. Yeah, and they know we're here. The moment he said it, the Skari attacked. They burst from the ravine like a tidal wave, their legs skittering, their mandibles snapping. The first one lunged at Voss, but he had already moved before it struck. He twisted to the side, his combat knife flashing. The blade sank into the creature's neck, and it collapsed with a shriek. The battlefield exploded into chaos. Verishtor let out a war cry and swung his massive blade, cleaving through 3 Skari at once. The other warriors fought fiercely, their roars shaking the jungle. Voss moved differently now. His body reacted before his mind could think, his instincts sharper than ever. He ducked under a slicing claw, kicked off a rock, and landed behind a Skari warrior. With a single motion, he drove his knife into the back of its skull. Corvalin, fighting nearby, paused for a fraction of a second. He had seen skilled warriors before, but Voss was moving like a Hezareth. The battle lasted minutes, but it felt like hours. When the last Skari fell, the jungle was silent once more. Verishtor looked at Voss, something new in his gaze. The night air was thick with the scent of battle, burning alien flesh, crushed vegetation and the metallic tang of blood. Voss stood over the last fallen Skari, his knife dripping with dark ichor. His breathing was steady, his muscles thrumming with energy. He had fought many battles before, but this one felt different. The Hesarith warriors around him watched in silence. They had expected him to fight well, but not like this. Not with such fluidity, such instinct, such precision. Corvalin stepped forward, his green scales glistening with sweat. He studied Voss, his yellow eyes narrowed. You fight like us. Move like us, yet you are not one of us. Voss wiped his blade clean and sheathed it. Maybe not. His gaze locked onto Corvalin's. But I just saved your life back there. Twice. Corvalin grunted but said nothing. Varishtor approached, towering over them all. The war chief's golden eyes gleamed in the dim light. Tonight, we have seen what our bonded warrior can do. He paused, looking at each of his warriors in turn. Now the question remains, what shall we call him? Voss blinked. Call me. Varishtor nodded. Among the Hesarith, warriors earn their names through battle. You are no longer just Voss. His voice rumbled like distant thunder. You are something new. Something greater. The gathered warriors muttered among themselves. Naming a non-Hesarith was unheard of. Corvalin's tail flicked as he crossed his arms. He is fast, precise, and he does not hesitate. He exhaled. He moves like the HFY, the ghost strike. Varishtor considered this a fitting name. Voss raised an eyebrow. So, what? You're calling me Ghost now? Varishtor smirked, showing sharp teeth. It is more than a name, bonded warrior. It is a title, a mark of respect. The other warriors nodded slowly. Even those who had doubted him before seemed to accept it now. Voss exhaled and rolled his shoulders. All right then. If I'm HFY, let's make sure the whole damn galaxy knows it. A new war begins. They returned to the war camp before dawn. Fires flickered around the central gathering grounds as the warriors sat, cleaning their weapons and tending to wounds. Voss sat beside Varishtor, his thoughts swirling. You are uneasy, Varishtor noted. Voss let out a dry chuckle. Guess I'm just wondering how the hell I got here. Varishtor studied him. You chose this path. You accepted the bond. Yeah, but I didn't know it would change me like this. He looked down at his hands. They felt stronger, faster, different. He could still sense Varishtor's presence in his mind, like a second heartbeat. Varishtor's voice was calm. Change is neither good nor bad. It simply is. Before Voss could respond, a sharp cry echoed from the jungle. A Hesarith scout burst into the camp, panting and bloodied. War chief. The Skari. They march in numbers beyond counting. They do not raid anymore. They come for war. Silence fell over the warriors. Varishtor stood slowly, his golden eyes burning. Then we meet them in battle. Corvalin stepped forward. The Skari will not stop until we are broken. If they bring their full numbers, we will be overwhelmed. Voss rose to his feet. Not if we strike first. Varishtor turned to him. You have a plan, HFY. Voss smirked. Yeah. We don't wait for them to bring the fight to us. We take the fight to them. Corvalin frowned. That is madness. Varishtor tilted his head. Or brilliance. Voss stepped forward, eyes blazing. You wanted to see if I was Hesarith enough to fight beside you. He clenched his fists. Then let's go show these bastards exactly what I've become. Varishtor bared his teeth in a warrior's grin. The hunt begins. The jungle was alive with movement. Voss crouched low, his body pressed against the thick roots of a towering alien tree. The night air was hot, heavy with the scent of damp earth and burning torches. Ahead, in the clearing below, the Skari swarmed. Hundreds of them. Their chitinous exoskeletons gleamed under the moonlight, their mandibles clicking in an eerie rhythm. They were preparing for war, building makeshift barricades, sharpening their razor-sharp limbs, and letting out guttural hisses as they readied their weapons. Voss's grip tightened around his modified rifle. This was the largest Skari force he had ever seen. Too many for a direct assault. Beside him, Varish Tor crouched low, his golden eyes scanning the enemy camp. The massive war chief looked as calm as ever, his powerful frame barely moving as he studied the battlefield. To Voss's right, Corvalin whispered, "This is madness. We should retreat and prepare our defenses." Voss smirked but didn't take his eyes off the enemy. "We sit and wait. We die. We hit first. We have a chance." Corvalin scowled but said nothing. Varish Tor finally spoke, his deep voice like distant thunder. "You are certain of this, Vakarshai?" Voss gave a sharp nod. "We can't fight them head-on, but we don't have to." He pointed toward the large supply caches stacked in the center of the Skari camp, tall crates of weapons, fuel, and food. Varish Tor considered this, then nodded. A precise strike. A hunter's strike. Corvalin let out a low growl but finally relented. "If we do this, we do not fail." Voss grinned. "Then let's make some noise." The attack begins. The Hesarith warriors moved like shadows through the jungle, each one trained in stealth and precision. Voss followed closely, his enhanced senses guiding him through the darkness. They split into small teams. Varish Tor led the first group toward the western edge of the camp. Corvalin took the second team north. Voss and 3 others moved along the eastern ridge, their target the fuel storage. The Skari were creatures of instinct. When threatened, they swarmed, but only if they knew where the attack was coming from. Voss planned to make sure they never got the chance. He signaled to his team. 3, 2, 1. A single shot rang out. The first explosion tore through the night, sending flames into the sky as the fuel depot ignited. The fire spread instantly, consuming crates of supplies and sending panic through the enemy ranks. Skari warriors screeched in confusion. Some ran toward the fire. Others searched the jungle, trying to find the attackers. Then the second explosion hit. Varish Tor's team struck the western side, destroying the Skari weapon reserves. Blades, rifles, and plasma cannons, gone in a fiery blast. The enemy was now scrambling, their forces divided, their plans in disarray. That was when the real attack began. Varish Tor let out a thunderous battle cry, and the Hesarith warriors charged. Voss leaped from his position, his rifle blazing. The first Skari he encountered barely had time to react before a plasma round tore through its skull. He spun, dodging a swinging claw, then drove his knife deep into another enemy's chest. The battlefield was pure chaos. Varish Tor swung his massive blade, cleaving through Skari like they were nothing. His golden eyes burned with the fury of battle. Corvalin fought with precision, his strikes lethal and calculated. He moved through the enemy like a predator, his green scales slick with blood. And Voss, he moved differently now. Faster, sharper, every motion felt natural, like he had trained for this his whole life. He ducked, rolled, and struck with lethal efficiency. A Skari warrior lunged at him, its mandibles snapping. Voss felt it before it happened. He dodged left, spun behind it, and drove his blade into its neck. Varish Tor saw him fight and let out a deep, satisfied growl. The bond has made you more than human. Voss barely heard him. He was too focused, too locked in. They were winning. A costly victory. The battle raged for what felt like hours. One by one, the Skari fell. Their camp burned, their warriors scattered. What was meant to be a full-scale invasion was now a massacre. Voss stood in the middle of the battlefield, breathing heavily. Bodies lay around him, the air thick with smoke. The remaining Skari flowed into the jungle, their army broken. Corvalin wiped his blade clean and exhaled. It is done. Varish Tor sheathed his weapon and turned to Voss. We struck first, and we struck well. Voss let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of the battle settle in. This was just the beginning. Vereshtor stepped forward, placing a heavy hand on Voss's shoulder. Tonight, you have earned your name. Corvalin, for the first time, gave a small nod of respect. Vakarshai. Voss smirked. Told you I had a plan. The war had just begun, and the galaxy was about to learn the name Vakarshai. The fires of the ruined Skari camp still burned, casting flickering shadows over the jungle. The smell of scorched flesh and smoldering wood filled the air. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. Voss sat on a fallen tree trunk, his rifle resting across his knees. His body ached, his muscles burned, but his mind remained sharp. The rush of combat still pulsed through him, but something else gnawed at his thoughts. Vereshtor stood nearby, his golden eyes locked on the distant horizon. His massive frame was covered in blood, none of it his own. He looked victorious, but he also looked wary. Corvalin approached, his green scales shimmering under the dim light. We struck first. We crushed them, but the Skari will not accept this loss. His voice was low, serious. Voss nodded. Yeah, this wasn't their full force. This was just the beginning. Vereshtor finally spoke, his deep voice rumbling. The Skari are not like us. They do not think of honor. They do not seek balance. He turned to face them. They only seek domination. A Hesarith scout rushed into the camp, his breathing heavy, his expression tense. War Chief, the Skari forces, more of them gather beyond the valley. Voss stood instantly. How many? The scout's tail flicked with unease. Thousands. Silence fell over the warriors. Corvalin clenched his fists. So, they are coming in full force. Vereshtor exhaled slowly. They seek to erase us from this world. Voss looked at the battlefield, the broken bodies, the fires still burning. He knew the Skari wouldn't just attack. They would wipe everything out. And this time, the Hesarith wouldn't survive a direct battle. A new strategy. Vereshtor gathered his warriors in the war tent, the large structure made from thick, woven hides and reinforced bone. A massive map lay stretched across the table, showing the jungle terrain, the river crossings, and the cliffs surrounding their home. Voss leaned over the table, scanning the map. We can't fight them head-on. If we do, we'll be crushed. Corvalin grunted. Then what do you suggest? Voss tapped his finger on the narrow canyon to the north. We make them come through here. Vereshtor's eyes narrowed. A bottleneck. Voss nodded. If they pour through all at once, they'll be trapped. We rain fire down from above, collapse the walls, cut their numbers in half before they even realize what's happening. Corvalin studied the map. It could work, but the Skari are relentless. Even with the canyon advantage, we would still be outnumbered. Voss smirked. Then we make sure we're not fighting them alone. The warriors exchanged glances. Vereshtor folded his arms. You have a plan. Voss took a breath. I do, but it's risky. Corvalin exhaled sharply. Vakarshai. At this point, risk is all we have. Voss nodded. Then listen carefully. A dangerous alliance. The jungle night was silent. Too silent. Voss moved carefully through the thick brush, his rifle raised. The moonlight barely touched the ground beneath the massive alien trees. He wasn't alone. Vereshtor and Corvalin flanked him, moving like shadows. Behind them, a dozen elite Hesarith warriors followed. They weren't hunting this time. They were here to negotiate. With someone dangerous. They reached a clearing, a rocky plateau overlooking the valley. And there, waiting for them, stood the last people Voss expected to see. The Drakari. Towering reptilian warlords, their dark red scales gleaming under the starlight. Their leader, High Warlord Xarek, stood at the front, his piercing black eyes fixed on Vereshtor. His armor was adorned with the bones of his enemies, his sharp teeth bared in a mixture of amusement and curiosity. You have courage to come here, Hesarith. Xerek's voice was deep and menacing. Why should I not kill you where you stand? Verishtor did not flinch. Because we have a common enemy. Xerek's cold gaze flicked to Voss. And this is the human I have heard of. The one they call Vekarshai. Voss smirked. I like to make an impression. Xerek let out a low, rumbling chuckle. Perhaps you do. His expression hardened. Why are you here? Voss stepped forward. Because the Skari aren't just coming for the Hezareth. They're coming for everyone. He let that sink in before continuing. If we don't stand together now, we all fall. Xerek studied him for a long moment. The Drakari were ruthless warriors, known for their brutality and cunning. But they were also calculating. Finally, Xerek let out a slow breath. You are bold, Vakarshai. And you may be right. His dark eyes gleamed. The Drakari do not make allies. But he bared his sharp teeth in a grin. We do enjoy a good fight. Verishtor inclined his head. Then let us fight together. Xerek's warriors let out a deep, guttural war cry. Voss smiled. The Skari thought they were coming for a weakened enemy. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The sky burned red with the glow of distant fires. The jungle trembled as the Skari horde advanced, their monstrous forms moving in endless waves. The air vibrated with the screeches of the insectoid warriors, their sharp limbs clicking as they prepared for battle. Voss stood atop the canyon ridge, his rifle in hand, his heart steady. The battlefield stretched before him, a narrow valley where the Skari would be forced to march straight into a trap. Behind him, Verishtor and Korvalin waited, their warriors ready. Further back, the war host, led by Warlord, stood like a wall of armored titans. Voss exhaled. This is it. Verishtor placed a massive hand on his shoulder. You have led us to this moment, Vekarshai. Now we finish it. Korvalin checked his blade. Let them come. And they did. The battle begins. The first wave of Skari warriors surged forward, filling the canyon with a black tide of exoskeletons and snapping mandibles. Voss raised his hand. Wait. The enemy rushed forward, moving as one. Faster, closer. Voss dropped his hand. Now. The canyon walls erupted. Explosives, carefully placed along the rock face, detonated in a fiery explosion. Massive boulders crashed down, crushing dozens of Skari warriors beneath their weight. Screeches filled the air as dust and debris clouded the battlefield. But the Skari were relentless. Those who survived the rockfall charged ahead, climbing over their fallen kin. Open fire. Voss and the Hezareth warriors unleashed a storm of plasma fire. Blue and gold energy blasts tore through the enemy ranks. On the other side of the canyon, Xerek and his Drakari warriors leaped into battle. They did not wait. They crashed into the Skari lines with terrifying force, ripping through their enemies with claws and blades. The battlefield became chaos. Voss versus the Skari commander. Voss fought through the swarm, his rifle emptying round after round. He moved like a ghost, ducking, dodging, striking. A massive Skari warrior emerged from the smoke. This one was different, taller, stronger, its exoskeleton gleaming black like obsidian. The Skari commander. It locked eyes with Voss and lunged. Voss barely dodged in time. A razor-sharp claw slashed across his armor, cutting deep. He gritted his teeth and rolled away, grabbing his knife. The commander hissed, charging again. Voss ducked under the attack, slamming his blade into the creature's side. The knife barely pierced its hardened shell. The Skari grabbed him, lifting him off the ground. Voss struggled as its mandibles snapped inches from his face. Its grip tightened, crushing his ribs. Then, a massive golden blade swung through the air. Verishtor, the Hezareth war chief's weapon, cleaved through the Skari's arm, severing it in one brutal strike. Voss hit the ground hard, gasping for breath. Verishtor bared his fangs. Fight with honor, insect. The Skari roared and lunged. Varishtor met it head-on, driving his blade through its chest. The creature twitched, then collapsed. Varishtor turned to Voss. "Are you still breathing?" Voss coughed, then grinned. "Barely." The war chief extended his hand. Voss took it, pulling himself up. No time to rest. The battle wasn't over yet. Victory or extinction. The fight raged on. The Hesarith and Drakari warriors held their ground, cutting down wave after wave of Skari. The canyon walls were slick with green alien blood. But still, the Skari kept coming. Voss glanced at the horizon, and his stomach dropped. A second Skari army was approaching. "We can't hold this line forever," Corvalin shouted. Voss's mind raced. They needed something, anything, to turn the tide. And then he saw it. The canyon walls. If they could bring them down. Completely. They could bury the Skari army for good. Voss grabbed his comm. "Exarek, do you still have those heavy explosives?" The Drakari warlord's laughter echoed through the channel. "You plan to bury them all, human?" Voss smirked. "Damn right I do." Exarek didn't hesitate. "Drakari warriors, set the charges." Voss turned to Varishtor. "We need to pull our people back." "No." The Hesarith war chief nodded. "All warriors fall back." The retreat was brutal. The Skari sensed weakness and pushed harder. But then, boom, the explosives detonated. The canyon walls crumbled. A tidal wave of rock, dirt, and fire crashed down, consuming the Skari army. The ground shook with the force of the collapse. And then, silence. The end of the war. Voss stood on the ridge, breathing heavily. The Skari were gone. Corvalin wiped blood from his blade. "It is done." Varishtor placed a heavy hand on Voss's shoulder. "You led us to victory, Vakarshai." Xeric crossed his arms, smirking. "Not bad, human." Voss let out a slow breath. They had survived. But he knew this was only the beginning. The Skari weren't the only threat in the galaxy. And Vakarshai, his legend was just getting started.